Let's pray before we open up the Word. Father God, I thank you so much that your Holy Spirit is with us, guiding us, directing us. And we ask, Holy Spirit, that as we open up your Word this morning, that you would speak to our hearts, that you would give us some understanding, some revelation, some insight that we can take away and just meditate on during the week. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. For our 4th wedding anniversary, we went out for lunch, and then afterwards we were sort of a bit of a loose end, and I decided that we were going to go and see a romantic movie. That's something that you do for a wedding anniversary, right? And we sort of looked at the board outside the cinema, and there wasn't that much to choose, but we chose a movie based on the actors, and there was the word comedy sort of included somewhere, so that's what we did. It was called The War of the Roses, and it was the worst possible movie for a wedding anniversary. It was horrendous. But other anniversaries have come and gone, and I still remember that one. When they called this a comedy, if I'd read the reviews a little more closely, they were referring to black acid-tipped comedy, and I didn't find it funny. Horror movie would be more accurate. It was the most escalated war between a couple, Mr. and Mrs. Rose, of what happens when offence is not dealt with well. Over and over during that movie, there was this hope in me, wanting to believe that there could be an amicable resolution, that could be achieved, but it just kept going and going and going, and there was no happy ending. Thank you, Danny DeVito, who directed it. What is more horrifying, I think, is that the movie is based on a real couple, Mr. and Mrs. Rose, Michael and Rona Rose, who live in Miami. And I think the takeaways for me for that particular anniversary date was screen the choice of your movie beforehand a little more accurately, and handle offence quickly and well. And today, as we're continuing the story of David, we're going to look at a story where he doesn't handle offence so well at all. So last week, we looked at some of the experiences David had while he was in exile in the wilderness. And this was an exile that goes on for years. And we have many stories documented during this time where David keeps moving on to the next place, to escape King Saul and his army who is chasing him down. And today, we're going to consider another wilderness experience. David is human, and just because he's identified as a man after God's own heart, there is a tendency for us to consider that he always got it right, that he always made the better choice, that he always turned to God rather than his own flawed emotions and pain. But fortunately for us, the Bible does not whitewash David's humanness, and we have some accounts where his life is not always so honourable. And this story occurs smack bang in the middle of his wilderness season. He now has around him 600 plus men who have come to him distressed, in debt, or discontent. And David has the job of giving them purpose and industry in a barren place. That is no small task. One way he would do that was to raid Israel's enemies, the outlying communities of the Philistines, and he would raze their villages to the ground so that there were no witnesses left that could report back to say it was David who led those attacks. Remember, David is a soldier. He is not an accountant. He is anointed and called as a warrior in the kingdom of Israel. He is at war against the enemies of Israel, whether the reigning king of Israel recognizes him or not. So David continues to engage in that calling. He engages in the opportunities that he has until God moves him to the next place or the next season. And then another way that he is building capacity in this band of ragtag soldiers was to protect the locals against other foreign raiders who would come in against the people living in Israel. And this is what we find David doing in chapter 25. So let's read from verse 1 in that chapter of 1 Samuel. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him. And they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. A certain man in Moab who had a property there at Carmel was very wealthy. He had 1,000 goats and 3,000 sheep, which he was shearing in Carmel. His name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. She was an intelligent and beautiful woman, but her husband was surly and mean in his dealings. He was a Calebite. While David was in the wilderness, he heard that Nabal was shearing sheep. So he sent 10 young men and said to them, "Go up to Nabal at Carmel and greet him in my name. Say to him, 'Long life to you, good health to you and your household, and good health to all that is yours.' Now I hear that it's sheep shearing time, and when your shepherds were with us, we did not mistreat them, and the whole time they were at Carmel, nothing of theirs was missing. Ask your own servants, and they will tell you. Therefore, be favourable towards my men, since we come at a festive time. Please give your servants and your son David whatever you can find for them." When David's men arrived, they gave Nabal his message in David's name. Then they waited. Life is constantly offering us change. Samuel died. Samuel had been a constant in Israel for a long, long time. He was the last of the great prophets and judges. And now that era closes. He was a man who never got to see David sit on the throne. He never got to see, outside his prophetic vision and faith, the promise that God would position a good man on the throne of Israel. And there was a period of national mourning for this giant in the faith. And then almost immediately, David moves. He goes to the desert of Paran near Moab, which is not far from Mount Carmel. And I wonder if there was an unsettling, a grief that David was experiencing from the death of Samuel that caused him to tilt off his normally very stable axis. It is in times of stress and grief and loss where we can be vulnerable to not handle situations as well as we might normally do. So it is here in the desert of Moab near Mount Carmel that another opportunity for finding occupation for David's men that occurs. And David tasks his men with not just being a group of bandits raiding the enemies, but now being protectors of the citizens of Israel. Bandits and raiders from the surrounding tribal groups would regularly swoop in, It had been doing that for generations. Here, David causes it to stop. He protects the locals, serving their well-being. The sheep duffing stops. The raiders now have a wall of protection around the local farms that they have to penetrate first. I read one opinion that described that David is running a corrupt regional protection racket, unbidden and unwanted, demanding payment on the threat of the locals' livelihoods and lives. I don't read it like that. If you have 600 men who have a background in their recent histories of being renegade and discontent, they need a purpose. They need to work. And if you are trying to move them from a place of discontent to a positive place, they need positive activity and occupation. And one of these local land barons was a well-established man named Nabal. This man was rich and influential, but unfortunately he is also boorish, surly and mean. He was not being nominated for Employer of the Year. But David and his men never stole from him, but they protected. And then they waited for the accepted time for recognition of their services. The end of the shearing season is the harvest festival of the pastoralist. I remember reading about the history of the Australian wool boom and how when the last of the wool clip was taken in, the bigger stations would host a lavish shearing carnival. The bigger the place, the bigger the celebration. Places like John Darien on the Darling Downs, it was a huge sheep station during the 1890s. And their post-shearing festival, that would last for over a week. They would have this lavish ball that they would put on. This was this kind of event. It is extravagant. It is a declaration of this man's wealth. Nabal is splashing it around. His prosperity is on display for the community. And David respectfully sends a delegation to have some of these supplies provided to his men in recognition for their services during this event. This was a normal protocol of hospitality in this time. So let's see how that went from verse 10. Nabal answered David's servants, "Who is this David? Who is this son of Jesse? How many servants are breaking away from their masters these days? Why should I take my bread and my water and the meat that I have slaughtered for my shearers and give it to men coming from who knows where?" David's men turned around and went back. When they arrived, they reported every word. David said to his men, "Each of you strap on your sword." So they did, and David strapped on his as well. About 400 men went up with David while 200 stayed with the supplies. One of the servants told Abigail, Nabal's wife, "David sent messages from the wilderness to give our master his greetings, but he hurled insults at them. Yet these men were very good to us. They did not mistreat us, and the whole time we were out in the fields near them, nothing was missing. Day and night they were a wall around us the whole time while we were herding our sheep near them. Now think it over and see what you can do, because disaster is hanging over our master and his whole household. He is such a wicked man that no one can talk to him." So David gets the response from Nabal. Nabal is obviously not an idiot. He hasn't lived with his head under a stone. Nabal knew who David was. He knew he was the son of Jesse. He knew he was running from Saul. And he dismisses David out of hand. He takes the benefits without any sense of obligation. Nabal is a taker. And it is not surprising that David is offended. Massively offended. This is disgusting treatment. David's rage escalates and he goes from 0 to 100 in a moment. Now, I am of the school of thought that our emotions are not wrong or right in themselves, even the ugly and uncomfortable emotions, the difficult emotions of offence, anger, rage, and disgust. The emotion themselves are just internal messages that can inform our situation. Our emotions are provided by God to tell us something. When we learn to handle and read our emotions well, they can help us understand what is going on. The intensity of the anger is a message telling David that this situation is wrong. It is insulting, it is demeaning, it is unjust, and it is grossly unfair. But David doesn't do what he has done in the past. Normally, he takes a pause. Normally, he reflects and prays and considers his options and what response will serve him, his men, and God in the best way. But this time, rather than doing that, he straight away is arming his men and activating an attack against Nabal. He is out for revenge. And for this commander, this means razing the community Nabal has built around himself to the ground and obliterating the lot. When Nabal wouldn't offer a gift of appreciation, David was going to take it as loot from an act of warfare, with a lot of suffering thrown into the mix for good measure. This is a rash response. It is violent and it is impulsive. But there is a servant in Nabal's household that reads all the signs. He sees disaster hanging over the wild festivities and over his master's household. This man is obviously not drinking in the thick of the party. He is clear-headed and he is concerned. And he activates a more considered response. This servant goes to Abigail, Nabal's wife, and Abigail is described as beautiful and intelligent. And I would add, sensible and astute. And the servant tells her what is going on, and she activates a response to this news. And we'll read that from verse 18. Abigail acted quickly. She took 200 loaves of bread, 2 skins of wine, 5 dressed sheep, 5 shears of roasted grain, 100 cakes of raisins, and 200 cakes of pressed figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Then she told her servants, "Go on ahead, I'll follow you." But she did not tell her husband Nabal. As she came riding her donkey into the mountain ravine, there was David and his men descending towards her, and she met them. David had just said, "It's been useless, all my watching over this fellow's property in the wilderness so nothing of his was missing. He's paid me back evil for good. May God deal with David, be it ever so severely, if by morning I leave alive one male of all who belong to him." When Abigail saw David, she quickly got off a donkey and bowed down before David with her face to the ground. She fell at his feet and said, "Pardon your servant, my lord, and let me speak to you. Hear what your servant has to say." "Please pay no attention, my lord, to that wicked man Nabal. He is just like his name. His name means fool, and folly goes with him. And as for me, your servant, I did not see the men my lord sent. But now, my lord, as surely as the Lord your God lives and as you live, since the Lord has kept you from bloodshed and from avenging yourself with your own hands, may your enemies and all who are intent on harming you, my lord, be like Nabal. And let this gift which your servant has brought to you be given to the men who follow you. Please forgive your servant's presumption. The Lord your God will certainly make a lasting dynasty for my Lord, because you fight the Lord's battles, and no wrongdoing will be found in you as long as you live. Even though someone is pursuing you to take your life, the life of my Lord will be bound securely in the bundle of the living by the Lord your God, and by the lives of your enemies he will hurl them away as from the pocket of a sling." When the Lord has fulfilled for the Lord every good thing that he has promised concerning him and has appointed him ruler over Israel, my Lord will not have on his conscience the staggering burden of needless bloodshed or of having avenged himself. David said to Abigail, "Praise be to the Lord, the God of Israel, who sent you to meet me today. May you be blessed for your good judgment and for keeping me from bloodshed this day and from avenging myself with my own hands. Otherwise, as surely as the Lord, the God of Israel lives, who has kept me from harming you, if you had not come quickly to meet me, not one male belonging to Nabal would have been left alive by daybreak." Then David accepted from her hand what she had brought to him. "Go home in peace. I have heard your words and granted your request." When Abigail went to Nabal, he was in the house holding a banquet like that of a king. He was high spirits and very drunk, so she told him nothing at all until daybreak. Abigail loads up a supply train of donkeys and sends it on ahead. There is nothing to suggest that she thinks that what David was asking for was misplaced or outside locally understood protocol. She intercepts and cuts across his plan for destruction. It reads that it was done quickly, but we're not talking about throwing together a couple of loaves of day-old bread and a few Coke cans into a basket. This was rations to supply David's army, enough for 600 men. This was attending to what had been dismissed out of hand by her husband. She bows down to David in a sign of respect as a dignitary, not a bushranger. I notice that Abigail does not whitewash the reality of her husband's behaviour. She openly acknowledges that Nabal has behaved badly. She calls him by name. Nabal means fool. This is not just being ridiculous, but Belial, which means without profit, worthless, evil, ungodly, wicked. This type of folly means vile villainy. That is a damning assessment of a person's character. But Abigail is saying, David, you are not like this. She obviously knows of David as well. Remember that David, a few years ago, was the talk of every living room and every dining table. Abigail refers to the battles David has won. She refers to his upright and honourable reputation. She even alludes to the victory over Goliath. That simple statement, the lives of your enemy he will hurl away as from the pocket of a sling. And she discloses that she knows that he is anointed to rule over Israel as king. The Lord's promise to build a lasting dynasty through him. And she intercepts his current plan for destruction with a reminder of who he is and what he has been called to. And by doing this, she intercedes for her household and the lives of her husband's men. What I really appreciate about this exchange is that Abigail causes David to take a pause that he was unable or unwilling to put in place initially. She acknowledges that what went down was wrong and unfair. She takes the acknowledgement of that and then causes David to consider an intelligent and considered response to this situation. Because where he is going at the moment, where he is headed right now, is not against the house of David, not against the house of Nabal, but against his own destiny. If David continues down this track, he is going to undo every good choice, every wise decision, every discerning response he had made up to this point. And eventually that would mean that David could end up in a place that could well look like Nabal or even King Saul. They might have position, wealth, and influence, but they do not have the good character to go with it. Do you notice that all the times David has fought battles, he never lifted a hand against the people of Israel. Here, he was making the people from whom God had appointed him to protect into the enemy, regardless of whether they are easy or difficult people to get along with. And that what he was about to be remembered for was not a victory, but ruthless, ungodly bloodshed. Nabal was known as a taker, but here David was choosing to do exactly the same. He was setting himself up as king and judge when he was not given that authority yet. David was tempted to take a shortcut, to avenge his hurt pride and his offended feelings, and that is not the way of God. David's wisdom is that he listens to Abigail. He acknowledges behind this pretty messenger was also the hand of the Lord God, Jehovah Elohim. That's the name that is inserted into scripture there. Jehovah Elohim, the self-existent, the internal, the supreme judge. Ultimately, David is responsible to God as his judge, and he is answerable and accountable to him first. It was not right for David to avenge his offence in this way, and he acknowledges his intent. He thanks Abigail for her astute thinking. But this is not the end of the story of Abigail. She had made an appeal to David in verse 31. It says this. She says to David as she's talking to him, "And when the Lord your God has brought my Lord success, remember your servant." This was a declaration in her belief in God's plan and destiny over David. She did not want to be forgotten when he rises to that place of influence. And this is how that petition was fulfilled by David. From verse 37, it says this. In the morning, remember they've had this big party. Nabal's drunk. Abigail goes to bed and doesn't say anything. In the morning when Nabal was sober, his wife told him all these things. And his heart failed him and he became like stone. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Praise be to the Lord who has upheld my cause against Nabal for treating me with contempt. He has kept his servant from doing wrong and has brought Nabal's wrongdoing down on his own head." Then David sent word to Abigail, asking her to become his wife. His servants went to Carmel and said to Abigail, "David has sent us to you to take you to become his wife." She bowed down with her face to the ground and said, "I am your servant, and I am ready to serve you and wash the feet of my Lord's servants." Abigail quickly got on a donkey, attended by her 5 female servants, and went with David's messengers and became his wife. This is the story of being seen and remembered. God saw Abigail's life living in an abusive relationship and how she consistently held herself above the gross behaviour of her husband. God saw Nabal's harsh disregard and bigoted treatment of his chosen king-elect. Nabal has a stroke and dies. The consequences of our lifestyle choices can be used by God. And God reminded David that he had not forgotten him. Even in the wilderness, he didn't need to take matters into his own hands. The message that Abigail boldly carried to David, along with the lamb chops and the wine and the dates, was this: you are anointed to be king, but you are not there yet. How you carry yourself in the meantime between the promise and the reality of it in that meantime will also determine your destiny. That is your responsibility. The timing of that destiny is God's responsibility. And David made an oath to Abigail. As soon as he hears of Nabal's fate, he makes good on that oath as his responsibility. David was not going to be a taker. His responsibility ongoing was to choose a higher path, as a king should. He was going to fulfill his promise to her, and they were married. I love reading various traditions around these scriptural narratives, particularly from various Hebrew rabbis and teachers. And there is a story that when Abigail gets down off the donkey, she shows a little bit of thigh and David burns with passion. There was chemistry between these two. And part of that tradition was that David was strapping on his sword, not just to avenge his men's insults and Nabal's offence, but to fulfill his desire to rescue Abigail from a curse, and wanting to take Abigail as his wife straight away. Again, a shortcut. But remember, pause, Abigail reminds David that she is a married woman and not available. David is not to take what is not his to take. And in this story, in just 10 days, that all changes, and David invites Abigail to become his wife. I love Abigail's response to this proposal. I am your handmaiden. I'm not here to be a taker. I'm not here to position myself as a future queen, but I am here to serve, to wash your feet. What does that sound like? There are shadows of the example of Jesus coming through David's story again, but this time not from David. It is Abigail who intercedes for mercy. Abigail saves her husband's household from destruction. Abigail gently but firmly restores and directs David back to his true path. Abigail doesn't self-promote but humbly serves, even washing feet. Desert treading feet. So Abigail leaves the lifestyle of an influential first wife of a land baron to join a bush ranger who is living in caves out in the wilderness. That's a big change to make. But I love the idea that Abigail is joining David in that in-between place, in the meantime, knowing that all of these promises will be fulfilled. That is such a declaration of faith. Faith that God remembers his promise, that God is faithful, that God was opening an opportunity for her to be part of the royal household, that God remembers and restores. What a beautiful story. This particular story is one of my favourites. So let's consider some questions to help us reflect on this story and how it might apply to us right here, right now. Am I holding some sort of offence in my heart? Where have I been so offended that I can't think of anything but revenge? What could I do to slow this process down? Who are the people I could check in with when I am being impulsive? Do I listen to the Abigails in my life? What gets in the way of me being able to consider what they say? How can I develop my own ability to be able to support others by being astute and considered? Is there someone in my life that I can see is jeopardising their best potential? How can I support them to get back on track? Am I a person who is after royal positioning or an opportunity to wash feet? If I am in an in-between place, am I a person who is able to carry myself responsibly and honourably in the meantime? For years, David has been living in the wilderness with the responsibility of being a commander of 600 plus men. Part of this means that he needs to be able to find them appropriate occupation. And when he is in the desert of Moab, he takes that opportunity to protect the locals from foreign raiders. But when he is taken advantage of and insulted, David is offended and he goes in for revenge. I remembered a challenging family season of trying to manage young toddlers in church. And this particular day, on a Sunday, Kate, who is my youngest, she had a moment. Children do have moments. It is a developmental reality. And we decided to take an approach of intentional ignoring. It is a recognised strategy and probably not suitable for church, in hindsight. But I came from a background where ministers would say, nah, don't worry about it, I can talk louder than your child. So, context. This particular day, Catherine's having her moment, and the pastor stopped, stared at my screaming child, and told the lady standing beside me to take her destructive child outside. I could have just said, yeah, you take her, that's a good idea. I never thought of that in the moment. But I was mortified. I bundled Kate and my humiliation up and went out. What a terrible moment. I was so embarrassed. Every eye turned and gave me what Graham calls the evil eye. Oh, a terrible parent. I was horrified by my inability to read the situation. After all, I had grown up in churches, but children will sometimes surprise us with their resilience and their ability to throw a tantrum, even in church. So I wrote a letter to the pastor apologising for that miscalculation. That to me was the end of it. And it probably would be something that I've just filed as a bad day, except for the response that the pastor made. I was really surprised by what happened next. When the pastor got my card, he rang me up. He got his secretary to send me a card. And the gist of it was this, that he was surprised and no doubt very grateful that I wasn't offended by what had happened. He appreciated that I had handled it this way. He told me that people have left churches over this kind of offence. The truth is, I was offended. The situation was embarrassing and horrible. But feeling offended does not dictate my response. It doesn't mean I have to be spiteful back. And as I paused and I prayed and I chose to respond in a particular way, it diffused the situation rather than causing more pain and more alienation. Abigail steps forward to intercept an offended David. She was able to intercede and direct and redirect him to a different path. She acknowledges that what happened was offensive. She validates the wrongdoing and she appeals to David to be the better person anyway. This is what David needed, to take pause and to choose a better way of dealing with some of the awful experiences he encountered in that season of waiting for his promises to be fulfilled. Let's pray together. Father God, we thank you that in your wisdom you have made us as human. You've given us emotions. You've given us the experience of being able to experience things like offence and anger and disgust. But we pray, Father, that you would help us to take pause and to notice what these messages are telling us, that we would choose to be able to take stock of what the situation is and not just reflex to strap on a sword, but to take a more responsible and considered response. To choose the way that we speak, to choose the way that we act, so that it is more honouring to God, more honouring to Jesus, and that by this action, Father God, we will not sabotage the plans and the purposes that you have for us. That we would be able to step in more fully of who you've created us to be, step into more fully what you have called us to. We ask these things in the beautiful and precious name of Jesus. Amen.